I am just so thrilled that we have had a relationship with the Age Wave people. And Maddie has been so kind to come on our show several times already with this amazing research on aging, on women and money, on caregiving, on all kinds of great topics that are really important to our listeners and people who watch us. And it's really great to have cutting edge research available to us when we're teaching, and that's what we get. So I'll tell you a little bit about our guest here. Dr. Ken Dychtwald is a psychologist, a gerontologist. He's a best-selling author of 18 books. And these books are on aging, longevity, and issues related to this. So one of his most recent ones, which I do have, is What Retirees Want. And the newest is Radical Curiosity. So since 1986, Ken has been the founder and CEO of Age Wave, and it's a firm that was created to guide companies and government groups in product and service development for boomers and mature adults. So if you do have a business that is in this field, you really do want to check out What Retirees Want, because I read it, it's really, really great. His client list includes half of the Fortune 500. So that's pretty darn impressive. So Ken, welcome to Smart Women Talk. I'm so thrilled that you're here.
Well, I'm honored and delighted to be here. And it's great that my wife, Maddie's been on several times. So it's nice to follow in her footsteps.
Yeah, we did a show on, you probably know who the companies were, but we did a show on retirement and women. Mm-hmm. And we also did one that was about aging and caregiving. Mm-hmm. And there was another one when she first came out with her book. This had to be 10 years ago, 8 years ago. She was on our guest.
She's on her fourth book now. So I think the one that she was on your program with was about women power. It's called Influence, about women, power, and money.
Yes, yes. Yeah, it was just really fantastic. So, when you wrote all these different books, as we said, 18 books. And I was surprised, and I'm sure others were too, when you came out with a memoir. What is it that inspired you to write this memoir at this time? Were people asking you, or is this something that came from, that you were inspired to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll tell you what stirred inside of me to do it. And I think there might be maybe those of you listening and watching can scratch your head and say, well, I wonder if I'm feeling any of that same stuff. First of all, our company, Age Wave, was doing a body of research about inheritance. And this is about a dozen years ago, and it was in the financial community. And we started doing focus groups, and nobody wanted to talk about inheritance. They thought it was like a cheesy subject. It's, dividing up the loot and bad. So I said to the focus group moderator, why don't you insert the word legacy? Would you like to leave a legacy or receive a legacy? And the conversations exploded. And what we realized was that word had more depth, more meaning for people. And then in our study, we determined that there were 4 key pillars of legacy. And I know you know this, Katana, but let me just lay them out. First and least important, it was important, but it was the least important of the 4 were financial assets and real estate. More important than that were possessions of emotional value. There had been a study at the University of Minnesota, was called Who Gets Grandma's Yellow Pie Plate? It kind of said it all. There's some things we have, a ring, a house by the lake, your dad's baseball glove, mom's piano. It may not be worth much, but have enormous value. Mm-hmm. More important than that, in second place, were instructions and wishes to be fulfilled. Have we sat down with our kids or our partners and said, look, if I'm, I hope I'm around a long time, but if something happens to me, I want to make sure the grandkids get X, or I want to make sure that you stay fit, or I want to make sure that I'm going to be okay. So let's work out sort of a game plan. But at the top of the list, and you'll know this because this is so much of who you are and the work that you do, people said the most important elements of a legacy were your values and life lessons, more important than all the stuff. Mm-hmm. And so we were doing this study, and around the same time, my dad passed away, and I was with him the last night of his life, and we had kind of a bumpy, bouncy relationship, but we got close, especially at the end. We talked everything through, and after he passed away, I thought, okay, I'm sort of moving on to the next chapter. But I found that things are moving around inside of me. You know, when we all have a mom or a dad pass away, you start to think about, you know, who am I a little bit, and who am I going to be in the last chapters of my life? And so I got the idea that even if it was just for my kids, I was going to try to gather my stories and life lessons. If that's really the wealth of life, if you don't gather them, they're gone. You know, if you don't write them down or say them into a recorder, no one will ever know. And I'll say one other thing on this, that I did a little homework, and this is going to sound like just words, but I realized that back in the 15th century, some of the religious traditions believed that all of us, when we pass our 40th birthday or so, ought to have two wills. One is a material will. Here's what I own, and here's how I want it divided up for next generations. But then there was what was called an ethical will, which is kind of an odd phrase. And I looked it up, and an ethical will is, what are your lessons? What are your stories? What do you believe? And it's incumbent on each of us to write them down or to record them in some way and to gather them. So I thought, all right, I'm going to do that. So I actually hired a storytelling coach, and I began having weekly sessions, and I began telling these lessons and stories from my life. And what I thought was going to take a month or two wound up taking 3 years. And I had about 500 different stories. And then I began to realize, wow, I might have like a book here. And I began to let some people read it outside of my family. And folks said to me, you know, this may be your best book ever, because rather than being some sociologist type treatise on the future of retirement, these are my own heartaches. These are my own lessons. This is the love of my life stories. And so I'm very proud. The book came out a few months ago. It launched as Amazon's #1 bestseller in the psychologist biography category. And I'm getting a lot of lovely and wonderful attention. And there's even some talk about making a film of it. So it's been kind of a fun ride for me. But I want to say that the lesson is that even if nobody reads it right away, the exercise of thinking, all right, so what have I learned? You know, what if somebody were to ask me today, what are the major lessons of your life that you think would be valuable for others to benefit from? Maybe you had some mentors, or maybe you had some successes or failures. So for me, the crafting of Radical Curiosity was cathartic. It was therapeutic even.
So, you know, we actually did that when my stepfather had lung cancer. You know, we had, because I'm a certified financial planner, I had all the estate planning and medical durable power of attorneys all in place. So we got to focus on their quality of life and quality of care, which was wonderful. But I brought him to the lake. He lived a year, by the way, after he was diagnosed. So I brought him to the lake and I videotaped him. And I got the story for his children. And then we also found a lot of the pictures. I noticed you had a lot of really great pictures, you know, and I got those for the kids. So he was my stepfather, but after the funeral, he died in October. We got together for the holidays and I got to play that video for them.
And I bet he felt honored for you to be doing this. You know, we think, oh, we don't want to bother mom or dad by hassling with this, but there's something quite respectful about asking people to take a little bit of time and tell you what they've learned in their life. So good for you for doing that.
Well, and you know, we learned a lot of stuff that I never knew. That's what's so important. I think people should try doing this. And we moved him after the hospital. We sold his home while he was there, and he moved into independent living near us. And so I played it. My mom was still there, and I played it for all the people that lived there. And they loved it because they were from his generation. And then he, some of the things he shared, they were really excited to hear. So when your children, so now I have to ask you, your children and your family, so how have they reacted to your book?
Well, that's a big question. So I have a daughter who's 34 and a son who's 31, and they both read it in manuscript form. And we had long discussions, and there's chapters about my relationship with them in the book that I wanted to make sure felt true to them. And then this is a bizarre exercise, Katana, but each of them sent me back redlined, edited copies. And I would tell you that that's an interesting exercise, having your kids edit your life. Dad, you sound like a jerk when you're telling this, or why don't you say more about your failure? You trying to cover over on that. And gee, I didn't know you met all those presidents, and which ones did you like? And so my kids, it became like an interactive exercise. It opened up discussions with my kids. And I'd like to feel that one day, neither of our kids have children yet, but one day I might be long gone. They'll have kids who are 20 or 30 and they'll say, hey, who is that grandpa guy? Or who is that grandma gal? And I heard they got remarried every year. What was up with that? And they'll want to read the book. So it's kind of this feeling of passing something forward in time. And my kids were very encouraging. And I think I'd like to feel that they were proud of me for doing it.
Oh, I'm sure they're so proud of you. And I think what you're doing too is you're showing others that they can do it. And everyone doesn't have to go get published. They can publish it very simply and inexpensively now if they want it, just for friends and family. So, congratulations. That was a lot of work, and it is really interesting. I am keeping it on my nightstand.
Oh, you're so kind.
Well, no, it's a really great book. And so now I want to ask you this, radical curiosity. Book titles are so important, and I have a feeling that, and it's one man's search for cosmic magic and a purposeful life, and purpose is on everybody's mind right now. How in the heck did you come up with it? And then there's this keyhole. Can you tell us how this came about?
Oh, yeah, what great questions. Well, first of all, I've always had next to me in all of my offices this. I've got one over there. I've got one here. Every office I've ever had. And I've always thought of myself as sort of like the Sorcerer's Apprentice, that kind of goofy Mickey Mouse character who's trying to do the sorcerer's magic and winds up mucking things up. And so that was the working title I always had. This memoir is going to be called The Sorcerer's Apprentice. And then I found a wonderful publisher who read the manuscript, and he says, I don't think we're going to use that name. And I said, well, yeah, we are. And he says, well, I have a better idea. I says, I can't imagine that. I kind of know what's in my heart. And he said, I think we ought to do this book and title it about what your life's journey is really about. And I said, all right, I've just finished 3 years of trying to figure that out. What can you tell me? He says, your life has been driven by curiosity. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of talk in the modern age about abundance or wealth or success. But you know what? Curiosity is an important ingredient, especially as we grow a little bit beyond our 30th birthday. A lot of people in their 50s and 60s sort of, are still living back in the day. And this curiosity theme is important. And I said, well, let's call it radical curiosity, because I have really taken the deep dive frequently in my life. And the subtitle, which you mentioned, One Man's Search for Cosmic Magic and a Purposeful Life. The publisher said, that's kind of an odd subtitle. I said, well, it's sort of an odd life. And it's true. And you in your teachings and in your podcasts and webcasts, you bring up the word purpose a lot. And partly what I think is that it's not as though we get a purpose when we're 12 and then we just paint by the numbers. Life is about continually trying to figure out, okay, now that I am 30, what might my purpose be today? And a lot of people find themselves at 50 or 60. And as you mentioned, I've been working in gerontology for 47 years now. So I've been studying aging and how people relate to their birthdays and what I call circling around the sun. But a lot of people feel purposeless. They find themselves at 55 or 60. And it's kind of like, well, the kids are out of the house and maybe their career is in the wind down and they just don't know who they're supposed to be anymore. Mm-hmm. And I often remind them that they may have picked a career when they were 19, one night when they were drunk in college and they decided to become a whatever, and that's what they've been for their whole life. And maybe it wasn't who they really are. Maybe now that you're a little bit more of a grown-up, when you and I, we get to be 40 or 50, all of a sudden we know some stuff we didn't know when we were younger. And we can not necessarily be aiming towards, we got to please our parents. You can be thinking about, what brings me passion? Mm-hmm. And for example, I'm at a stage in my life now where I want to do more than ever. I want to make a positive impact in people's lives. And so I might not have been thinking that way when I was 30 and just trying to be able to pay the rent and get started in my life. So the idea of finding new purpose, mm-hmm. and maybe you're a late bloomer, maybe you'll discover you like to paint and you become a great artist, or you want to be a school teacher and better than whatever other job you had. Or for example, my mother-in-law, who's no longer alive, but when my father-in-law passed away, she was only 60, and they had an unhappy marriage. And then she fell in love with a man with whom she spent the next 25 years, and he was the love of her life. So, the possibility that there may even be romance and deep love waiting in our future to shape our purpose are all a part of this new era where we have so much more longevity than any other generation ever had.
Okay, well, what was the most radical thing that ever happened in your life that even surprised you?
I'll mention 3.
Okay.
So I went to school to be a physicist. I grew up in Newark, New Jersey.
Really?
And then in my junior year of college, I had to take an elective. So I took a psychology course, and it was the psychology of human potential. And the idea of the course was that all of us had these extraordinary potentialities: physical, mental, spiritual, creativity, sexual, whatever. And that most of us were only using about 5% of our potential. And I thought, man, I never heard an idea as cool as that one. So I actually dropped out of college and moved from Newark to Big Sur, California. And I spent the next 4 years living and working at Esalen Institute and writing my very first book, Body Mind, when I was 22. That was a pretty wild thing that I guess I did. Another thing that was sort of a surprise was hearing my daughter's heartbeat when my wife was pregnant. Now you might think, okay, that's kind of a normal thing, and women have this experience of making a human being in their body. But that one kind of blew my mind. I felt like it was both kind of cosmic and primitive at the same time. The idea that there's this being growing that came about through our connection, our love. I had to put that into the amazing experience. And last, I'd say that I hinted at it before, but when I finally met my wife, Maddie, who you know, we got married in 1983, and I said to her, the night of our wedding, we were at a little bed and breakfast. I said, that was fun. I wish we could do that every year. And she said, well, people don't do that. I said, well, we can do that. And she says, okay, let's make it interesting. Let's every year get married in a different location with a different religion. So Maddie and I have had 30 weddings. So 39 weddings, excuse me, so far. So I'd have to put that in a category of kind of oddball. But people say to me sometimes, well, how come you get remarried every year? And I always say, well, how come you don't? I mean, marriages and friendships can get lost in the busyness and tangle of life. So why not have a ritual to remember and celebrate a connection?
Oh, that is like really wonderful. And I saw there was one other gal who was doing that. She became a coach, and she gets married, all over the place each year. She picks.
And by the way, I'll tell you too that
you started a trend.
It doesn't have to be a big, there have been books written about our marriages.
Yeah.
We've been on. It doesn't have to be a big theatrical thing with a million people, but what happens is, whether we're getting married as we have at the top of the Chichen Itza pyramid in a Mayan ceremony, or Marie Antoinette's Chapel of Love in Versailles, or in the Sea of Cambodia, or the Church of Spilt Blood in Russia, or in our backyard with our kids doing the ceremony, we always take a few days almost like what you do, and I've done homework on you, the way you do your financial advisory work, you take some time to know what's happening and who people are and what's happening in their lives. We take a few days around our remarriages, and we got married on Thanksgiving, so it's that time of year.
Oh,
And
my.
we say, how do we do this last year? Maybe there was a death and someone we loved, or maybe our business had a bad year or a good year. Have I been a good wife? Have I been the best husband I could be? And we try to course correct. So it's sort of like a punctuation point rather than having our lives be a kind of a run-on sentence. Those rituals of getting remarried, that moment when we face each other and we say, I do, it sounds cheesy, I know, and corny, but there's a moment of reflection about the importance of partnership.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And so you really did start the business Age Wave together with Maddie.
Yes, we did. We started our company together, and we've been running Age Wave together for 36 years or so now, which is on most days has been great. Some days we bang heads, but it's all part of the dance.
What a great partnership.
Thank you.
No.
Maddie, my incredible wife, she'd been married once before that didn't work out as a young woman. And then she'd had a successful career as a model and actress. But when she met me and I was doing these talks about the future of aging, she said, it was a little bit like words and music. She said, you're a 30-year-old guy, 35-year-old guy, you're talking about new images of aging. You need to put pictures to that. We need to add dimensionality to it, or else people won't understand what you're saying. And I said, do you know how to do that? And she says, of course. She didn't, but she learned.
Yeah.
And before you knew it, Age Wave began getting all this attention because of the speeches we were giving and the documentaries we were making. And that's really all because of Maddie's ability to bring heart and imagery to the ideas that we were cooking up. And since then, of course, Age Wave has grown. We've had hundreds, at some point, even thousands of people working in our companies. And but our marriage and our partnership has been at the core of it.
That's great, because so many marriages don't last. My husband and I have been married for 36 years now.
Oh, good. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
But I'll say this, so I never met Margaret Mead, the great cultural anthropologist, but she was once quoted as saying, I've been married 3 times, all successful.
Yes.
And I had to stop and think about that, because it may be for many people that a certain partnership or marriage works at some stage in life, and then you grow up or move on and it's not the right fit anymore. So I've been lucky. I've had the same partner for these last 39 years, but there are some people who move on and find new connections and new meaning in relationship. And I respect that too.
And the greatest thing is when you can do it in an equitable way and remain friends. One of the coaches that I love, she's been on the show, is Deborah Poneman, and she talks about her ex-husband with such love and admiration, and they're still great friends. And the kids are still so happy, because mom and dad are still friends. And I think they've been apart for quite a while too. So, when we can do that, it's also, I think, role modeling for others that, oh, well, this is okay. It doesn't have to be war, for us to end. So, you were more of a hippie and, when you were younger and you went to school. And what did you say you went into?
I initially went to school to be a physicist. I wound up getting my doctorate on the psychology of the body. So I made a right turn, no hand signal. I made a radical shift, and then got invited when I was turning 24 to head up the first preventative health research project with the elderly. And I found myself all of a sudden, it's like, whoa, I'm teaching yoga to these 90-year-olds and doing meditation and biofeedback with older people. And this is back in the 1970s.
Wow.
And they were kind of interesting. And all of a sudden, if I could get past the wrinkles and stuff, all of a sudden I realized, wow, they're kind of wise beings. Most of us in the 70s, we were searching for gurus or pop psychologist who might give us a tip or two about how to live a good life. And I did one exercise with these people. We would meet for 3 hours in a group, 15 of us each week. And we had various co-leaders. I worked with some extraordinary women, and all sorts of famous type people were kind of wanting to be in our game. But I said to everybody, go home and bring back some pictures of when you were my age next week. And this is going to sound really.
How old were you then?
I was 24.
Okay, so
and I know I'm about to sound really stupid, if maybe even more stupid than I've been sounding. Somehow, when you're young and you see old people, you imagine they were always old people, which is, of course, ridiculous. So they came in with these pictures, women and men, when they were young, and they were handsome and sexy and beautiful and vibrant. And I thought, wow, I mean, there's like this lifeline. And you don't just become an old person, you live a long life. And not only that, but, you know, when you're young, even if you're smart or you do well in school, you're still kind of a beginner. But you get to be 50 or 70 or 90, you've been to some rodeos, and there's some things you understand, and there's some buds of wisdom that pop up. That I'll give you an example. I became friends with Betty Friedan in the last decade or so of her life. And back in, I guess, 63, Betty wrote The Feminine Mystique and gave birth to the modern feminist movement. Yeah. And then she wrote a book called The Fountain of Age in the 1990s. And she and I were on the lecture circuit together. And I said, Betty, what were you thinking when you wrote The Feminine Mystique? She said, the time had come that women no longer be measured by the metric of men, how they could either please a man or be like a man. She says, you know, that's a bunch of crap. Women need to be measured by whatever metric they want to be measured by. And I said, okay, stay with me on this. Now, when you wrote The Fountain of Age, she says, you know, we live in a society that measures people by the metric of youth, how firm your body is, how good your skin is, how youthful you are, color of your hair. She says, that's bunk. It's time maybe we ought to be measuring everybody by the metric of maturity, wisdom, perspective, experience. And that was like a big wake up for me, because as I've grown older and working in the field of aging, I don't want to walk around trying to be young all the time. I'd like to have all of us be a little more proud of the experience we've got. And we got to pull society being less ageist and a little more respectful. And I'll add one other thing, and I'm not just saying this because I got a powerful, beautiful wife and because of all your talents and successes. There is no question in my mind that the most extraordinary dimension of aging in the years to come are going to be women. First of all, women live longer than men. Second, they age with more fluidity than men. Third, they're up against more of society's prejudices and attitudes than men. And so they are having to really bust up against that. And as we age as a society, the numbers are going to tilt more and more in the direction of that's where the wealth is. That's where the wisdom is.
How many trillions is passing on?
$70 trillion as of last week, the boomers will be passing. And a lot of people think, oh, older women, that's where a lot of poverty is. Actually, there's truth to that. Yeah. However, the wealthiest segment of American society right now are older single women. As you know, both because women are increasingly becoming the breadwinners, and if they've been partnered with a man and he passes away, and they become the holder of the estate. Yeah. And also, I know when I was growing up, about 3% of the households in America, women were the primary breadwinners. And now it's about 32%. And it's moving towards going to pass 50%. Why? Because for every 100 young boys that graduate college over the last decade, there have been 130 girls. Yeah. And so the women, the women of our generations, our daughters that are coming up, they're kick-ass women. And they're, so in the future, aging and feminizing, we're going to see more and more women power. Yeah. And I think that a lot of leadership, a lot of presence on boards, a lot of financial decisions, endowments, charities, are going to be driven by the passions and priorities of women.
And that's,
Which
you know,
is why I wanted to be on your show. And I get lots of calls to be on webcasts and podcasts, and I turned a lot of things down, but I thought, you know what, I've been following you. So it's an honor for me to, because I think you're at the tip of the spear.
well, I think something's going to be happening because I left Ameriprise, which I had been at American Express Financial Advisors 20 years. And then the year it turned to Ameriprise, I decided to retire. And I had these trademarks that I had done: smart women's coaching, midlife millionaire, designated daughter. And, I had gone through the strategic coach program up in Toronto for 3 years. So I had all this creativity, but because I was in the American Express blue box, I couldn't do any of it. Everything we couldn't ruin their brand. It's one of the most recognized brands. I totally get it. So I finally decided that I would leave and come and work with just women. And so it's really, and it was really women in midlife, right from the beginning. And now it's, and so the thing, I even got the URL for Reinventing Midlife. This would have been in 2008.
Wow.
And so I was so far ahead, I guess. And now it's coming, isn't it coming at us like a wall of
Huge.
All these midlife women who were going, yeah, you can go retire. We're not. We got ideas. We're doing stuff. And that's what I'm finding. It's like they're retiring to something. But what I'm trying to make them also look at is the legacy, but like get prepared in advance. Don't wait. So I'm so glad you're here, because I think starting with the story is probably a great way to get the conversations with the family, so you can go to the next level and just make sure that there's not a triggering event where there's crisis, because that's such a great way to start it and maybe giving for the holidays, giving this book to loved ones. So you have the conversation, so you can do all the stuff around it, the medical planning, the financial planning. I'm always going to be a financial planner regardless.
Yeah, but think about it. First of all, you are way ahead of the curve, which has got to feel fun for you. Sometimes probably a little frustrating that people aren't catching up, but you're way ahead of the curve. And I don't know, I've come to appreciate that, having worked now, and we were working, as you know, with Ameriprise during that period. In fact, the logo for Ameriprise, the compass, that was my idea. And you had a powerful head of marketing, Kim Sharon, during that era when you guys were forming your identity, breaking away from American Express. And money for what is sort of a question. And a lot of people think, oh, we're just going to help you manage your money or make sure you have a lot of money or you're financially secure. But I think the next question is, for what? Like, for what's the life you want to be living?
Mm-hmm.
Where do you want to be based? And what do you want to do with your money? Or what will give you peace of mind? And so these are more the kinds of questions that women are inclined to ask versus, guys doing the bears and bulls and making a killing routine. I also want to say that having been tracking on this idea of purpose and legacy for a few decades myself, a lot of people think it's simply what you reflect upon when you're older and you write a memoir or something. I think no. I think it's like, what would you like your legacy to be? I mean, if let's say you're 47 years old and imagine you're 90, what is it you want people to think about you? What is it about your life you'd like for people and you to think, that was the best of my life? And, we've got this ability to drive the ship, to steer ourselves. And so having, for example, a coach, a counselor, a guide like you, or friends, to think about not only what is my wealth, and by the way, the word wealth comes from the Welsh wele, which means optimal well-being. So it's not just about money, it's about your optimal well-being. So you're an optimal well-being coach, as far as I'm concerned. And money plays a key role, because you don't want to find yourself homeless or strapped for money, or what people say in focus groups, don't ever want to be a burden on my family. That's exactly the phrase we've heard in every city in America. So you want to make sure you have your financial game in good shape, but then also be thinking about, who do you want to be? And what friends do you wish you had more of? And too many people, as they grow older, they may be managing their finances, but they're not managing their friendship ecosystem. And they got friends that are not nourishing. And how do you make new friends? Or maybe you can volunteer and meet a whole new cast of characters. Or maybe there's a way you can give back that'll make you feel better than you've ever felt before. And so I think that this, what I call third age, is a time of new possibilities, new beginnings. And our grandparents, not so. When our grandmothers or grandfathers reached 60 or 65, they pretty well thought they were in the final inning.
I know.
It's time to have a few social occasions before your batteries wore out. Today, if you're a woman and you're 60, life expectancy is another 30 years. And that's assuming no breakthroughs in medicine or longevity for the rest of your life. And there will be many. So you might live another 30 or 50 years. And the question is, what are you going to do with all that life?
What are you going to do? What are you going to do with it? So there's someone in your book that has lived a very long life. He's, very old and very well respected. And I want to read what he said about it's President Jimmy Carter.
Oh.
So he says, I've been learning from Ken Dychtwald for years and am convinced that he is today's most innovative and original thinker on this important subject. And that's on aging, I'm sure. And that is really powerful. So how did you meet him? You have a whole section on presidents, but can you tell us about Jimmy Carter? My husband and I absolutely adore him and the kind of work he's done. So can you share with us a little bit about why he did that and how he ended up, how did you meet him?
Yeah, it's a kind of a kooky story. First of all, thank you for promoting the book. My publicist always says to me, you need to mention that there's a book for sale. And by the way, I will tell you that all of my earnings from Radical Curiosity are being donated to Esalen Institute, where I sort of had my start. So this is not about me getting rich from the book, but the more people who read it, the more Esalen can flourish too. So that's a part of I learned that from Jimmy Carter, actually. But here's what happened. It's probably about 20 or so years ago. And I get a phone call from this group in Georgia where I come speak at a mental health conference. And Rosalind Carter is putting it on. And I says, is there an honorarium? No, but we'll pay your travel. I said, well, I'm used to getting paid a kind of a fee. I'll tell you what, I'm willing to do it if I can have a private dinner with President and Mrs. Carter the night before. They said, well, that's a big ask. We'll get back to you. And they got back to me and they said, the Carters would love that. In any case, so I flew to Athens, Georgia. And I was told that President Carter was called to Washington. He was former president. So I would have dinner with Mrs. Carter. And she was beautiful, smart, tough.
Ooh.
And I gave a speech the next day to this conference, about 1,000 people. And I was being my kind of snarky, wise guy. And at one point I was talking about the need for a national elder corps, like a Peace Corps. I felt that our older adults had all this free time and all this knowledge and skill and compassion. Maybe they ought to be deploying themselves in communities. And so I mentioned in the middle of the speech, I said, Mrs. Carter, I don't know where you're sitting, but next time you see your husband, you tell him I've got a job for him. And the audience got very quiet and they're thinking, wait a minute, that speaker just called out the president. Well, about a week later, I'm back in my office in California, and my assistant says to me, you got to pick up the phone. There's someone on the phone who says he's President Carter. Probably a joke. I pick up the phone. I said, hi, this is Ken. Ken, this is Jimmy Carter. And I said, oh, who is this? My buddy Jamie, he's pulling a joke on me? No, this is the president. And he said, I hear you got a job for me. And I stumbled around, and he says, well, I have a question for you. He said, I'd like to write a book about aging. I'd like for you to be my teacher. So I wound up over the next year flying back and forth to Georgia and becoming very close with President Carter. And he did write the book. It's called The Virtues of Aging. And over the following years, we just became friends. And he said to me one day, how can I repay you for all this help you've given me? And I said, you can let me build a house with you. And he said, wait a minute, that's your payment? I said, yeah. So that year in Houston, 5,000 of us descended on Houston to build 100 houses in 5 days. And Maddie and I flew in, my wife and I, and we were assigned to work on house number 1. So I was the personal right arm of President Carter, and I worked with him the whole week. And I'll tell you one example. First of all, it was 102 degrees in the morning and 106 in the afternoon. And this guy was in his 70s and didn't stop sawing, didn't stop hammering. He wasn't going off into the air-conditioned TV van. He was working day and night. And I'm right there with him. On one of the days, we're putting in the toilet for this low-income African-American family that was going to live there. And I'm thinking, here's a former president of the United States putting in a toilet. And then on the 4th day, one of the project managers came to President Carter and he says, everything's running behind schedule. We got a problem. President Carter said to me, Ken, come up on the roof with me. So we're up on the roof and we're shingling, but he's hammering really loud and really fast. And then I noticed that everybody in our house starts to cut and saw and hammer faster. And then almost like a movie symphony, all the other houses and all the other thousands of workers started working faster. He didn't say a word. He didn't yell anything out. He didn't have a microphone or a megaphone. He just worked harder. And we got all the houses done the next day.
Oh my gosh.
And I thought, wow, I'm in the presence of a good man. And, like you said earlier, Futures and your program is a lot about women, and there's a few good men. Jimmy Carter's a good man. we as men could use some good role models because there's a lot of knucklehead guys out and about these days. And I'm not saying you have to agree with his politics or you voted for him, but that's a good man.
Well, we love having men in our show, and some of our, most brilliant minds have come in and shared their wisdom with us. Like you, I am so thrilled. I first heard you when I did a caregiving panel for with the area agency on aging in Detroit, and you were our keynote. So, and that was 20 years ago, I'd bet. So
long time ago. Yeah,
I know.
Yeah, and the fact, by the way, that look, if you've got a mom or a dad or an aunt or an uncle you care about and they're old, you probably have found yourself in a caregiving role. And by the way, your viewers and listeners will find this interesting. Turns out also that 92% of caregivers are now financial caregivers. Mm-hmm. So it's not just that people are helping mom get her prescriptions or helping dad get to the doctor. It's like those people are also running the checkbook and sometimes managing investments, sometimes responsibly, sometimes not. Mm-hmm. But caregiving is a no fooling around subject. Last year, for example, we had 4 million live births. So there were 4 million women and their partners who became moms, but 20 million people became caregivers last year. So this is not just a thing that happens to a couple of people over there. So long-term care, home care, how does one care for a loved one and not lose one's own sense of balance? Where do you get help to manage the finances of caregiving? Who do you talk to about whether you should have long-term care? This whole ecosystem of subjects rises up as we have more and more long-lived people, and we don't do as good a job as we ought to at matching our health span to lifespan. What do I mean by that? That for a lot of people, they spend the last 3 or 5 or 10 years with declining health, meaning that they need support and help, sometimes only a little. My dad became blind from macular degeneration his last 10 years, so he needed help. He didn't like that, but he needed it. And our dear, wonderful mom got taken down by Alzheimer's. So they, as young people, never imagined that they would need long-term care or caregiving at the end. Just like most of us probably think, oh, I'll never need any of that. But you know what? You ought to at least think about it and talk to a financial advisor and put some kind of a solution in place so you don't have to worry about it again, especially if you're a woman, because unfortunately,
you live longer.
Yeah, what happens is that guys say, hey, I don't need to worry about it. But then if the guy gets sick, his dear wife will look after him for 2 or 3 or 5 years. He passes away. She's exhausted. A lot of the money's been spent down. She's going to live another 7 to 10 years. Who's going to care for her? So the caregiving issue and having the financial preparation in place for a long life, a solo long life in the final years, is an absolutely essential part of everyone's discussion with their financial advisor.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there was a gal that I was going to have on the show, and she did a book on caregiving. I'll connect you guys with the names of these books. But the second book she wrote was Who's Going to Take Care of Me When I'm Old? And when I asked her about that, she said, well, most of the baby boomers, they're folks, they've gone through it, either they did the planning in advance, like, I did, thank God, with my family, or like one of my dear friends who's a financial advisor, her father refused, and she had to get conservatorship and go to court and guardianship. And it was like, it wasn't a nice ending, right? She said, most of us have already gone through that. But she said, where the problem is that now none of us think we're ever going to get old. We're not going to need it, but we know it. We all know we're going to die, and we all hope we can die like that. But all of us, our ages, we need to put our planning in place for our kids so that they don't have to deal with it, or that they understand. And then again, your type of stories here can tie, this is how I am. I love to tie the whole legacy with the caregiving and then the ethical will. Do you see how I'm thinking, yes, do it for parents, but then also think about yourself, start it young, start getting that in place with your kids so that they understand what you want. In this way too, you can maintain more control rather than having courts taking over.
Yeah, let me piggyback on what you're saying. So Maddie and I, when our moms and dads were kind of falling apart a little bit, and by the way, the statistics are that only 30% of people think they'll ever need long-term care. But 70% of us will need it at some point, even it maybe only be for a couple of weeks, and then we'll be fine again. But other people may need it for a while. Boomer generation. Our parents were having us, they averaged 4 kids each. Boomers have averaged only about 2 kids each. And so when we get old, if we think we're going to rely on our kids, it's not as many of them, and they may not want to do that.
And where do they live?
Right. And they may live across the country, or, our kids don't live near us. So what Maddie and I did in our 50s, we said, hey, you know what, we're going to have this difficult discussion. We actually purchased long-term care insurance, and as small business owners, it's a write-off. I'm not saying that's what everybody should do, but they should talk to you to find out what their solution is. And then we just don't think about it, because we don't want to find ourselves all of a sudden asking our son or our daughter to give up their job or their life to come look after us. That's sort of, we want to be better. We want that not to be our legacy, that we hurt our children's lives because of our absence of planning.
Absolutely. And I know we have to wrap our show. I can't believe it. It's already at the top of the hour. But in one thing to add to that, it really has an economic impact on the caregiver, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So that's important. But I want to finish this up with some more wisdom from you. What would you like to leave our audience with, I guess, as your closing thought, your tip? We would just love to hear that, because this has just been so rich and we've covered so much. And we have 1 minute, sorry, 1.5.
Take really great care of your body and the bodies of people you love. There's payback downstream. Second, make sure you have your financial house with the long plan in mind. And third, a little bit like the cover of Radical Curiosity, we got the idea for the cover from The Wizard of Oz, when Dorothy cracks open the door when her house comes down, and everything is in multicolor. Imagine that there's new possibilities in your future, that around the bend, there might be a rainbow waiting to be discovered by you. So don't think of yourself as being just on automatic pilot. Think of yourself as being an unfolding story.
And there's a gentleman, Chris Crowley wrote Younger Next Year, and it's about exercising. So I love you started with the health, then the finance. And what was the third? Curiosity?
Yeah, curiosity and willingness to explore and to reinvent. By the way, I'll say one last thing. We've done studies all over the world to ask elders in 20 countries, what's the secret to living a long, happy life? And every country, elders will say, it's the people you love and who love you back. And so that's the thing to keep in mind. Relationships matter.
Yes, happiness, health, wealth, and happiness. So, Ken, it has been so wonderful. Thank
Great
you
to
for
meet
being
you.
here, and we appreciate it. And everyone, thanks for coming to the show today. I'm excited you were here. And until next time, go out and live with more purpose, passion, and prosperity.